So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm recording this in the middle of this very strange power outage we're having today. It's got me thinking about some of these big questions of life and, the things we take for granted and then the things that we really need, those big questions. And I'll bet you've pondered these big questions too. What's the meaning of life? I wish it would be as easy as just picking up my phone and asking Siri. She seems to know just about everything else. But, sometimes it's just not that easy. You really have to wrestle with these questions. What's the meaning of the universe? What's my place in the universe? What am I in all of this grand vastness? What's the point of it? Or even, how do I treat other people? How do I interact with people? What do I do when I really need something from other people? Or what do I owe them? All of these questions are questions that, as human beings, we have to figure out our own answers to. And the ancient Greeks were no different. They had to figure out the answers for these as well. So in class, we've started to look at some of our people that we have that studied these questions and answers, and some of the answers that they've come up with. And remember, we talked about our spa day, our day where we can relax, kick back, and think about the big answers of life. So for these video notes, we're going to take a look at some of these thinkers and philosophers, and not just thinking about these big questions, but how they put it into action. So the Greek thinkers created the study of philosophy, which we remember means the love of wisdom. So these Greek philosophers pondered questions about the universe and developed the study of science and math as well. So they didn't just sit around thinking about, these things. They put them into action as well and really thought about how they could use the questions and answers that they came up with to better the world around them. There's three big ones we're going to talk about on our spa day, thinking about the world. And we know these three: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Go ahead and on your video notes, please circle the S in Socrates, the P in Plato, and the A in Aristotle, and write the word spa. You are going to need to know which order these philosophers came in. And we talked about how in class Socrates kind of started it all, and Plato was his student, and then Aristotle was a student of Plato. So if you can remember thinking about the world on a spa day, SPA, you'll remember the order of our philosophers. So we're going to start with Socrates here. And he is from Athens. All of these philosophers are from Athens. Remember, Athens had that mind-body balance. He created something called the Socratic Method. And he taught by asking students questions. Ms. Todrick always says you have to be able to tell me why you think the way you do. So Socrates would ask students a question. What is our purpose in the universe? And then the student would answer. And instead of giving his thoughts on it, Socrates would ask them another question. So look at some of these questions that Socrates might have asked. Why do you say that? What would be an example? Are there alternatives? What's the point of this question? What could we assume instead? So his goal was to get people to think about the assumptions they make and why they view the world the way they do. He was always questioning everything. And because he was such a skeptic and he very much wanted to ask questions about the universe, he was one of the few people in ancient Athens who thought the gods were not real. He thought they were make-believe. And because of his beliefs, and not just him personally believing it, but him teaching it to others, he was sentenced to death. And in fact, he was given an option. He was given the option to either take this poison, hemlock, or give up his teachings. And he chose to commit suicide rather than give up his dedication to teaching and searching for truth. Now, we don't have a lot of what Socrates had to say because he never wrote down his own words. Everything that we know about Socrates comes from his student, the P in our SPA, Plato. And he was one of Socrates' students, and he created this grand school to pass down Socrates' ideas and as well as his own. And this is kind of, this academy was considered the world's first university or college. So he wrote down all of Socrates' ideas. And he also wrote a book called The Republic, where he discussed what his ideal universe would be. And he laid out ideas about how people should treat each other, how the government should treat people, and what the role of science and philosophy was in the community. So most of what we know about ancient Greek philosophers comes from Plato and his writings. But his student took it even a step further. His student Aristotle wrote over 200 books. Could you imagine 200 books you get to write? And he very much thought that not just writing, but teaching was crucial for passing down knowledge. And so I love this quote: "Those who know, do, and those that truly understand, teach." His most famous book was Politics, and he talked about the three basic types of government that we've talked about: our monarchy, our oligarchy, and our democracy. And he kind of laid out what the strengths and weaknesses of each of those kinds of government were. And he also taught a great leader that we are going to see in lesson 3, Alexander the Great. So if you have watched our Mr. Nicky song before, he talks about he's the great Aristotle. He taught Alexander the Great. Okay. So these three, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, which we've talked about in class with our escape room, those really shaped and pass down these ideas about how we should treat other people, how government should work, and what a good leader should look like. And because of these ideas, the kind of, even up to today, the way that we teach and learn has been shaped by these philosophers. But they weren't the only big thinkers in ancient Greece. So it wasn't just our spa day buddies sitting around talking about what is truth, what is beauty, asking a bunch of questions like I did today in class. I know it drove you crazy, but you did so good, guys. We also had people in ancient Greece who worked to put these ideas into action. One of them is our buddy Herodotus here. And thanks to Herodotus, we know all about that Peloponnesian War, that war between Athens and Sparta. So he lived about 40 years after the end of the Peloponnesian War, and he traveled all around speaking to survivors and people who were there, collecting interviews and writing a history book about it. And he made sure that all the stories were true, and he kind of verified them. And so we call him the father of history, because he was really the first one to write down that idea. So, good way to remember it, Herodotus history. Those H's, connect, okay? We also have another H, though, the father of medicine, Hippocrates. He created something called the Hippocratic Oath, which was a set of rules for doctors that a lot of doctors follow even today. So, did you know that the Hippocratic Oath was created as this list of rules about how doctors should treat their patients? And doctors should do their best to help their patients, and it's still honored by doctors today. So you might have a doctor in your family and you can ask them about the Hippocratic Oath. But one of the things that they ask, or that is part of that Hippocratic Oath, is to first do no harm. That means that no matter what they do, doctors have to keep in mind that they want to not harm their patients. So you don't want to just experiment or, be careless. It's a really important philosophy to make sure people are treated well. And I always think of Hippocrates like a big giant hippo carrying a crate of medicine. I try drawing it, but it's terrible. So why don't you draw me a hippo with a crate of medicine to help us remember that Hippocrates was the father of medicine? Because when you see it, doesn't it just look like Hippocrates? That's not the right way to say it, but that's how that's kind of the mental picture I have. So if you can draw me a hippo carrying a crate of medicine for Hippocrates, I would love to put that up in my classroom. That'd be a lot of fun. Our last one is Pythagoras. Now, Pythagoras not just thought about ideas, but he also thought about math and geometry. And he's the one who figured out the formula for the length of a side of a triangle. So you might have seen this before. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So if you have this length and this length, you can figure out how long this length is going to be. And this is really helpful in building and designing, and really made it so that the Greeks could build some of these grand buildings they did that still are around today. Now, I want you to think about these Greek philosophers, our spa day buddies, so Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and our fathers, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, Pythagoras, the father of geometry, and Herodotus, the father of history. And I want you to think about which one do you think is the most important and why? Okay, which one had the biggest impact, maybe shaped the way people think? And you can pull in your knowledge from our escape room centers today as well to think about our spa day buddies, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And remember that is to help us remember what order they came in. So you can see here on this meme of the show The Good Place. That is a fantastic show that deals with a lot of these issues in a really funny way. And you see they talk about Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. We know all about those. Now, I will say that's a show to ask your parents whether you should be able to see, because, you know, it's kind of a teenage and adult show. So some families might like it, some families might not. But go ahead and check with your parents. But I love this because it says, who died and left Aristotle in charge? Well, Plato. So remember our spa day buddies. We're sitting around thinking about the world, and we will talk more about those ideas next time we meet. Have a great day, guys.